Hello from the depths, reading the Economicon. It is the Economancer, the high priest of the Economicon. Today I'm bringing part 3 essay from Inequality in Society, Social Science Perspectives on Social Stratification by Jeff Monza and Michael Sauder. Today we're going to be going over Wage, Labor, and Capital by Karl Marx. This is the third essay. This is the second of the main essays from it. In the classical works on social stratification and inequality. So a little background on Karl Marx. Many of the people that I call my friends are going to give two different answers on reading Karl Marx. The first is that he's a brilliant, in-depth philosopher who really breaks things down in multiple steps and makes you feel one thing and then flips it on you in a very narrative, counterintuitive, subversive way. The other is that it's like reading a 40-year-old drunk man on a ship in the 1800s. I'm somewhere in between. It's kind of hard to read some of it, and it's also some of the best reading you'll ever get. So if you haven't read Karl Marx, I invite you to, and to make up your own mind. But be advised, this is kind of the narrative setup that he gives. He goes, all right, step one, we're going to talk about capitalism morally. Step two, we're going to talk about kind of the science behind capitalism. Step three, we lead into this Hegelian frame where we've got capitalism. We've got internal contradictions. That leads to conflict. Then we have the antithesis. And then through the synthesis of these, we have no more contradictions. We have ended the conflict through this synthesis. That's kind of the framework that we're going step by step in. And I'm going to be doing this step by step in his quotes. So the first one, labor power is therefore a commodity, which its possessors, the wage worker, sells to capital. Why does he sell it? In order to live. This is the most basic, true quote on the face of the planet. To survive and to live, you have to sell your labor in modern day world. I'm sure there's a few people out there living in the woods. They're probably not going to watch this video. If they are, cool. Hey, how you doing? You're one of the few. But as a general rule, absolutely, yeah, you have to work to survive. But this kind of builds up a problem, right? We have to work to survive, but we're just surviving to work. Seems odd. Get to that. And the worker who for 12 hours weaves, spins, drills, turns, builds, shovels, breaks stones, carries loads, etc. Does he consider this 12 hours weaving, spinning, drilling, turning, building, shoveling, stone breaking as a manifestation of his life? As life? On the contrary, life begins for him where this activity ceases at table, in the public house, in bed. The 12 hours labor, on the other hand, has no meaning for him as weaving, spinning, drilling, etc., but his earnings, which bring him to the table, to the public house, into bed. So now we're kind of building into this idea of like, man, do we even get meaning from work? Now, if you're under the Jordan Peterson frame, like, yeah, you gain meaning from work, but that's in practice, that makes sense. In theory, it makes sense. In reality, it's a lot harder to justify that I build meaning from the increased responsibility of doing a job that I absolutely detest. And so that's what he's saying is like, okay, I work 12 hours a day. And as soon as I'm done and I'm hitting that clock, I'm out. I'm going to go hit the bar with my friends. I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to enjoy life. So all I'm doing is working just so I can go out and have fun. Again, we're building to this problem that we have in society. Within these fluctuate, okay, sorry, let me take a step back. Wages rise and fall according to the relation of supply and demand, according to the turn taken by the competition between the buyers of labor power, the capitalists, the sellers of labor power, the workers. Okay, so this is part of this science that he's breaking down. We've already started in some of the moral impositions. Now we're into the science. what is going on behind the scenes when it comes to wages. Within these fluctuations, however, the price of labor will be determined by the cost of production, by the labor time necessary to produce this commodity, labor power. What then is the cost of production of labor power? It is the cost required for maintaining the worker as a worker and developing him into a worker. So I have to pay you enough so that you'll stay working for me. I also have to pay you enough so that you can at least learn the job. Well, the time that I spend is a part of the cost for you. So I have to spend time to teach you how to turn the mill, teach you how to break the stone, because obviously I'm going to build up on all the other things that have happened so that you can be better at it and more efficient, which is something that comes up. The cost of production of simple labor power, therefore, amounts to the cost of existence and reproduction of the worker. This argument is still being laid out today by social democrats and others. Whether you agree with it or not, the current living wage argument is there and has been there since the start of capitalism. I need enough money to be paid to live. Not only do I need enough money to be paid to exist, but I need to be paid enough to live, therefore that I can reproduce, so that the capitalists have enough next generation to work the mill. So we're presupposing here that the poor is going to try to continue its population size so that the bourgeoisie, continuing in population size, can maintain this level where the poor work and the rich get rich. That makes some sense in reality if we think about it. But I'm not entirely sure that I buy this argument. And this kind of goes into the world that we live in. How much social mobility do we have? Is the bottom staying at the bottom? Does the rich always stay the rich? Depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers. If you ask Thomas Piketty, there is almost no social. If you ask Thomas Sowell, tons of social mobility. A lot of the social mobility is within a generation, so it's an intergenerational lapping thing. Whereas if you ask Thomas Piketty, he'll be like, okay, well, that may be true that there is some movement within the generation, but as a general trend, it's hard to say that, those who are poor are sometimes now rich. Of course, this happens in off cases, but they're becoming rich not in the material sense that Marx is setting up as a frame about owning capital, that they're not the leisure class. They've just went from being the poorest of the poor workers to a rich worker. So that's it. They're still the worker. They're still the proletariat. They're just not the poorest of the proletariat. And so that's kind of the difference that we're thinking about here. All these component parts of capital are creations of labor, products of labor, accumulated labor. Accumulated labor, which serves as a means of new production, is capital. This harkens back to what we had in last episode when it comes to Adam Smith and human capital accumulation. What this means is, okay, so we have a new machine that's obviously come from labor. So someone had to think of it. They had to use their human capital to think of this. Then we had to have someone build it. Then it's getting used. Then the people using it find better ways to use it, which leads to possibly new machines, so on and so forth. So we're building society on this accumulated labor. And we have that now. I'll give you a perfect example of this, right? You have a house. It is resources and you have people. We have the knowledge on how to build a house. They work together. The people with their labor and the labor that has come before them on learning the skills and trades and the knowledge all combine to build a house. All that an individual gets out of this return is specifically the labor that is done in building the house. So that person who owns the capital, they're getting the returns from what's being built, and they get the returns from the accumulated labor that's happened up until this point. That's not being dispersed enough. That's the part of inequality that he's pointing out here, specifically in this part, is that the capital that's been accumulated over time, through labor, is still controlled by those who controlled the initial set of capital. Now, this leads into the next one. Capital is therefore not only a sum of material products, it is a sum of commodities, of exchange values, of social magnitudes. Now, I've seen many different interpretations on this line. I'm going to give you mine. I think that this is in regards to institutions. What does that mean? So, in society, we know we have this human capital accumulation. This is also an idea that, we're testing out ideas. And ones that work, that are good, we keep and we try to dispense with the rest. Now, some of the bad stuff comes with it as baggage, but in general, this is what's happened. But it's also the idea of human capital being encapsulated into the institution from the material changes that have happened in society. So the sum of material products is greater than just the sum of material products, because it also has the added value of the institutions, the human capital, and how society itself builds around the capital. It is only the domination of accumulated past materialized labor over direct living labor that turns accumulated labor into capital. Exactly what I just said. We're building upon society step by step with this accumulated labor, which leads us to where we are now. Whether that's a change in institution, whether that's a change in society, an economic system. All of this is predicated on the things that have happened in the past. Thus, capital presupposes wage labor. Wage labor presupposes capital. They reciprocally condition the existence of each other. They reciprocally bring forth each other. This is an absolute true statement. I can have all the capital in the world. If I do not have labor to utilize it, it is therefore inert. I can have all the labor in the world. If I don't have any capital, nothing's going to be built, whether that's human capital or physical capital. I can have 500 barbarians at the gates. If they're all naked and trying to start a fist fight with the 15 guards, I don't think they're going to win. They might. I don't know, it depends how awesome these barbarians are, but the point stands. They're probably not going to win. We need capital, and we need labor. To say the most favorable condition for wage labor is the most rapid possible growth of productive capital is only to say that the more rapidly the working class increases and enlarges the power that is hostile to it. So, this is saying, well, this is kind of a critique of everyone who wants to push for economic growth and development. Like, okay, so you're going to keep growing and growing and growing, and this difference, this inequality between those who have and those who do not is only going to increase more and more as you build, because it's not like somewhere along the line we just said, oh wow, all this accumulated labor, I don't need any of this money anymore, bang, here you guys go. That's not going to happen. So he's pointing out, like, this is a serious issue in our society. And he even goes on to say, golden chains by which the bourgeoisie drag it in its train. So the workers, they've built this great society. Like, let's just take right now. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. But not everybody gets a piece of it. This inequality, no matter what it's built, it's still there. It's still the chain that you have to carry. Even though it's gold now, it's still a chain. The numerical increase of the capitals increases the competition between the capitalists. The increasing extent of powerful labor armies with more gigantic instruments of war into the industrial battlefield. Okay, so now he's talking about like the classical version of equilibrium, that one capitalist, since there's still economic profit, another entrepreneur is going to come in and say, hey, I'm busting down the door until everything is zero profit. That's the idea that the classicalists have. He says, yeah, okay, let's just say that that's true. Fine. How does that impact workers. I don't care how it impacts those who have. How does it impact those who have not? And he's saying, okay, so all of this continues to go up and up and up. You get more capital, you have more people, wages have to be driven down, right? Of course they do. You have to drive wages down. I have to continuously compete against all the other capitalists. He's going to sell a bushel for $5. It takes me $6 to produce. Where can I cut costs? Well, I can't cut it from the farm. The farm barely has enough to exist, and I can't buy the farm out yet, depending on the institution. But let's say I own the farm. I can't make the crops any faster, so I still have to deal with that, constraint. So where can I cut costs? He's pointing out that the only place that you can think of to cut costs is wages. So all of a sudden, it's just this constant precipitous decline in wages until we're back to serfdom. Now, the problem with this, and he goes on to expose more of the argument. Now, the initial argument makes sense, but the problem is when he involves prices. All right, so okay, I'm a capitalist. I can only make 5 bushels, you can make 10. You sell them for cheaper than I do. Okay, well, how can I compete with you? Well, I don't necessarily have to compete by making the same good as you. I can make my good better. So yes, it costs more, and yes, I have less, but I can raise the price of it because it's better than what you have. This price discrimination wasn't really introduced into society until much, much later, even though we kind of had an idea of it. But for the most part, like actually being able to utilize price discrimination scientifically through, price analysis, that's a fairly new aspect of microeconomics. So under this idea, like, okay, it may be true that we can just drive down wages, but it can also drive up wages in many instances. Like, okay, well, you have 50 workers and all of them aren't really doing that much. They're all because of the share of the division of labor, and they're not doing it really well because they're just trying to get done because they don't have any meaning or purpose behind what they're doing because they just want to hurry up and get done, get their shillings, and then go get drunk. Whereas my workers, I pay them a little bit more. My product costs more, but it's well done. And now I'm going to beat you in the competition because sure, everybody can buy your stuff. A lot of people are going to want to buy mine because it's better. This difference here is kind of what throws a lot of this argument out the door. Because the moment we can set price discrimination, the moment we know that certain goods are better than others, the moment that this doesn't just ring absolutely true. Now, how the division of labor is necessarily followed by greater division of labor, the application of machinery by still greater application of machinery, work on a large scale by work on a larger scale. So now we're getting into the argument. We're getting into the really big contradictions here. Okay, so we're just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing for growth. Okay, so now we've made the division of labor beyond simple, just to the nth degree of simplicity, where I could find anyone on the street to do this job. I don't need to care about what wages I'm going to pay because I'm going to pay the very lowest wages I possibly can. Because anyone can do it. There's no specialty. And it's caused by capital. Because the capitalists know that they can't continuously invest into the labor, so they're going to invest more and more and more into capital. And now we're just pushing out the labor. And we're going to push out the labor share of earnings. That's something that we've screamed about for 100 years. We're seeing it now. We're seeing a lot of these arguments being like, as we're moving into automation, all these people are going to lose their job because of automation. This is something that's been said for hundreds of years. Now, whether this one will be true or not, that remains to be seen. I don't know if it will. I'm not going to forecast this, but what I'm going to say is this argument's been done to death. Maybe it's right, maybe it's not. I don't know. But it's something that's been said over and over and over. And it hasn't proven true yet. So this is the last quote, and this is his summation of this. Let us sum up. The more productive capital grows, the more division of labor and the application of machinery expands. The more the division of labor and the application of machinery expands, the more competition among the workers expands, and the more their wages contract. So let's kind of think about this. So first we have to understand that this is not a moral argument being made by him. This is almost a consequentialist argument, being like, okay, so the more you do this, the more these wages are going to contract. And now we do see this to be true in many, many instances. So think about it this way. We don't really maintain the wages. We just push them off. Okay, so I don't want to do this job anymore. I can't really afford it. I'm going to outsource it to India, China, so on and so forth. And that's what we see. Now, here's one big takeaway for this that we have to understand about Karl Marx's ideas. Karl Marx is overall saying, all right, we have workers. They create the value, right? The owner incentivizes less work to be done by continuously contracting the wages down. Cool. This wage contraction therefore creates this conflict. Now, the capitalist wants to maintain a desperate population. So he wants to keep, the safety nets down. And this conflict is going to be inevitable. Now, we see this to some extent in our modern world. We see service jobs increase and we see material labor outsourced. This is not fixing the fundamental material issue that Karl Marx is pointing out. So, this is what his prescription was. Doing labor gets value and creates value. That value, thus, to be increased overall, you need to increase the value obtained in the labor. That will give you a bigger total output. So essentially what he's saying is like, all right, let's stop the living wage argument. Let's stop all of that. Everyone gets everything from what's being created, because it's not just the capitalist. It's not just the bourgeoisie is doing this. All of the things in society that are there, those have accumulated over time. So enough with the nonsense. Let's get equal shares to everyone who's working. If this factory's profit is 10 billion and there's 1,000 workers, that ought to be split up between them. And that is what he thought. And that is kind of the modern, the Marxist-Leninist materialist view of inequality. Now, what do I think specifically about that? I think it's partially right. It grasps a lot of the concepts that are a problem in our society. But what it fails to address, especially now, and some later, brilliant economists have come up with ideas thinking about it, which actually ended up leading back to Karl Marx, was Schumpeter, was like, okay, we have investment in society. This increased investment, whether it's investment in material or whether it's investment in human capital, it comes from the capitalist system. Now, as that increases and it goes out into society, that's good. That's what we want. We've seen how much we've had a grand change over time. So let's try to maximize that as best we can. And once we come to that conclusion, then we can move into socialism. But until then, we really, really need to maintain capitalism because it is the most efficient. It is the best way to create growth. Once we have enough growth that we can live off of in almost a near utopian society, then we move into socialism and everybody gets a fair share. But until then, we need to maintain competition. We need to maintain this cutthroat attitude. And that is what I think about it. We need to maintain competition. We need to maintain capitalism right now. And in that, I hope you have a wonderful day. Please like, share, subscribe, and come back tomorrow. We're going to be doing Karl Marx and Engels, another part of the classical works on inequality.